Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inurere series, where we celebrate the rich practices and traditions of generosity across Africa. I'm your host, Bidemi and Tendai. In this episode, we will explore how African giving traditions compare and connect with global philanthropic practices. We will discuss the impact of these traditions on communities and touch on how these practices can be integrated into modern philanthropic frameworks. And I have the pleasure of speaking with Tendai Risa. He is a development practitioner and researcher in areas of pro-poor development across Africa. Speaking of, I'm going to ask you what that means, Tendai, so just get ready. He's also the founder and executive director of Civil Institute, a Pan-African think tank established in 2018 with the vision of contributing towards the creation of an inclusive society. Tendai's work focuses on reframing thoughts and bringing new ideas around citizens' agency and solidarity, philanthropy and communities, public policy, citizens and civil society, social entrepreneurship, financial inclusion, land, and agrarian reform across Africa. So you can tell by now that Tendai is passionate about the African continent and is searching for answers and solutions to move the continent forward. Welcome, Tendai.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you so much. This is quite the profile. I mean, how did you do it?
So I think it's also, it's been close to 20 years working across the continent and a realization that there is no silver bullet for where we are to take us to where we want to go. So you begin to realize that there is need for a multifaceted approach. So you are weaving themes, but the real issue is to say, how do we deal with our challenges of underdevelopment, challenges of dependency, etc. So you'll find that you cannot just find one answer, but multi-layered answers.
Wow, that is inspiring. I mean, before we go into the conversation proper, I want us to take a moment to reflect on our own cultures. We're going to play a little game. You pick a number and you answer a fun and thought-provoking question about generosity. You have from number 1 to 30. So pick a number.
Wow, 11, my birthday.
My God, does this mean November?
November, yes.
That is so beautiful.
11.
Okay, happy birthday in advance. So, one moment.
Okay.
Number 11. Where are you? My laptop has taken this moment to freeze.
Interesting. That's what technology does.
Yeah. Okay, I found it. So let's go to number 11. Okay, I like this one. Have you ever been surprised by an impact of your own generosity? Like you did something, you did not know it would have so much impact, and it did. What was it?
So it's the small and insignificant things that we do in life that lead to huge change. I just received, I think 2 weeks ago, I received a letter from a young man that came to us looking for a job to be a gardener, but he had passed his Cambridge A-level examination. So we started him off to go to university. We just insisted that he goes to university. So I think between me and my wife, we just paid for his first year, then connected him with a foundation that I'm a part of. And now he's a chemical engineer and he's leaving the country, etc. So we know it's something that at the back of my mind I'd forgotten about. So when his email came, it was in the midst of another rush. You are worried about something else. It was one of those moments to pause and to reflect, to say, okay, there's some good that comes out of giving. And that was one of it. Yeah.
I want to scream. He wanted to be a gardener, and you insisted he gets an education.
No, when he told us about his qualifications, I just said, no, you can't work in our garden. Started talking, helped him. Because, it's us here in Africa, times it's $20 that makes a difference to go and get an application form. Just to go and buy the application form, you may not have $20. So people, when we talk about giving, people think we're talking of millions, but giving that youngster a chance to say, here's $20, go and get the form, fill it up and submit, because the window is still open for you to submit the application.
Wow.
And let's take it up from there. Then he gets a place, then we pay the fees, yada, yada. And now he's an accomplished chemical engineer.
I am happy. I am blown away. This story just made my day. I'm going to tell everyone about this story. Thank you so much for doing that. And this is really beautiful. You have another number to pick, though, before we move on.
Wow. Okay. Let me see. Okay, I'll pick 2 for my 2 guys.
Okay. Oh, that is so sweet. I like how you are attaching, you're attaching things to these numbers. Okay, so number 2, what act of generosity have you received that you've never forgotten? This time around, what did someone do for you?
Okay, so I also come from a very underprivileged, very challenged background. And if it had not been for a stranger, but you know how in Africa, everyone, an elder that you know is either an uncle, an auntie, etc. So an uncle took pity on me, an unrelated uncle. That's such a contradiction, right? An unrelated uncle took pity on me, and when we were at our wits' end with my mom on how we're going to pay the outstanding fees, etc., etc. Came to the school where I was learning. I was at a boarding school on the verge of being chased away anyway, and I was called to the headmaster's office. I thought it was the story to tell me that you're not writing your exams. I found this uncle in the office, and they just wanted to confirm how much is the balance, and confirmed, and he paid it off. And I managed to write my O-levels. If it had not been for him, I would not have written my O-levels, and I don't think I'll be here today.
My God. Now it makes a lot of sense that you helped the chemical engineer. This is amazing. I feel like we are done with the podcast now, but we need to talk more about our topic for today. Just one more thing. The theme of our series this year is called Inurere. So Inurere is a Yoruba term for generosity. In plain words, if I were to describe someone who embodies this value, it means one who is selfless, one who has a clean heart and mind, one who has a mind of goodness, of kindness, of love, and good fortune. It literally represents the pinnacle of perfect human being and society. There is most likely a term like this in many African communities. So in your country or community, if this term should exist, what would it be? What is it called?
So I live across 2 cultures, the Inurere culture, which is from the south of Zimbabwe, with a huge Zulu heritage. And also I live amongst the Shonas, and I'm Shona. So I think it will be a play of words, because when we in Isindebele, when they say upa, give, it can be taken at a very literal sense to say upa, can you give somebody something? But then there's another, Luana uyapha kakhulu, that person gives a lot. You know what I mean? So it's now embodies you. People now characterize you with your generosity. So at times it can be used in everyday language. But there's something that then begins to differentiate somebody, that somebody is known for their kindness.
Absolutely. That is the word. My mom would say, Enitonинuri, someone who has like this heart. This person cannot just help but be generous. All right. So moving on to the key questions of today. Tendai, your extensive work, more than 20 years in the industry, your work with CVO Institute, your focus on citizens agency, I believe this has given you a unique perspective on philanthropy, right, and giving practices. Based on that experience, have you noticed similarities between, you just talked about how you are in between cultures and communities. What are the similarities you've experienced amongst different communities and their giving practices?
So I think, initially I used to argue and with limited understanding that this giving we're talking about is unique to us Africans. You know what I mean? But when you begin to go to the Far East, for instance, when you are in India, in China, and other places, and also if you go to Latin America, to Asia, there are communities that exercise what we're talking about here. So I think what we are having and what we're celebrating is something somewhat a civilization that has not been destroyed by capitalism, because it is capitalism that has made us to realize our existence as atomic individuals. While everything else prior to that has always celebrated how we are interconnected. That's why for us here in Africa, we have Ubuntu, which is literally I am because you are. Our interconnected existences that you cannot say and you cannot have peace if you're the only one in the village sleeping with food in your house and others are starving around you, because you understand that's an anomaly. But capitalist societies can sort of tolerate that because they don't even know about what is happening next door. Initially, like I said, I thought this was unique to Africa. There are huge traditions of giving that come from biblical times up until now. And some of them unaffected, they continue as such. So I think what we're celebrating when we talk about African philanthropy or African giving is this building upon cultures, but realizing that our giving has never been about the privilege to say somebody else who is richer than us should give, but understanding that it is the value that connects us, the value that makes a community, is that kind of sort of existence and awareness that there are others who may have less, etc., and how do we do it as a community? So I think for me, I've been pleasantly surprised, especially when I visit rural communities, even in Europe. You know, we go to a place like Serbia, etc., Greece, etc. You'll be surprised by how they've also practiced these things. So I think for me, the threat to this conversation is probably a certain kind of urbanization that actually destroys communities because we come from different villages and we don't recognize each other. So I don't want to sound like, oh, Africa is doing a good job at preserving it. We are it's a threat because Africa is the most urbanizing continent as we speak. So the challenge is, are we able to preserve those values of solidarity, of care for one another, etc.?
Wow, thank you. Generosity literally makes the community. So still on this topic, there is a ripple effect to generosity. You just shared, surprisingly, you chose two questions that talked about how you received the generosity and many years down the line, you impacted someone's life immensely. What potential do you see for communal ownership and collective benefits through giving traditions that we have begun to carry? Even when we go to other places, we carry these values within ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's the biggest test of this conversation and where we are as a community of philanthropy practitioners and also people who are trying to push a certain agenda. So I'll say we are advocates. But what we're beginning to realize when you look at African diasporas, you know, the diasporas, Nigerian diaspora in Europe, in the US, Ghanaian diaspora, etc., you actually, when you go into those communities, there's a different dynamic compared to areas without those immigrants. So if you're in New Orleans and you see people of an African heritage, how they actually deal with the food question, how they deal with issues to do with solidarity, etc., is different. For instance, if you were to go to a purely Western society that has not been affected by values of immigrants. So I think immigrants, by their very nature, tend to also leave some seeds or some sprouts around how they live, etc. Especially even now, even if you look at the spreading, I always say when you're looking at a church or a mosque, it talks about the spread of a certain value. So when you see an African church thriving in Texas, in Austin, and when you see a mosque being established for the first time in a certain area, yeah, people may worry about, oh, there's a new mosque, but don't worry about the mosque, but look at the social relations around the mosque. Look at the social relations around that church. This church belongs to Nigerians. Look at how they are creating a community, etc. Because those are just, I can say, symbols or places where we come to be together. But look at when we disperse from the church, where we are going, the kind of communities that we are building. So I think there is that kind of hope that we see. And also the migration, literally the migration in between from a rural area into a city. And when you begin to look at how people from one village, when they get into Lagos, they begin to establish a burial society, a welfare society, based on the village of origin where they came from. Because on the one hand, they yearn for the village life, they yearn to hear each other's language, they yearn to share memories, but they are also spreading solidarity, etc. So it's not something that is programmed, but it happens organically. It's processes that we do on our own. The challenge for scholars is to say, how do you track all these things, to document them and to document best practice? But I can assure you it's going on.
And I love that you talked about migration, you talked about documenting these things, and speaking on migration, speaking on how some of these values spread across borders. How do you think, for example, some of these values are beginning to shape communities where Africans find themselves? It's beginning to shape policies, it's beginning to shape the society as a whole. How have these traditions influenced global philanthropic practices? Now let's talk about the sector itself.
Okay. So I think like I said, it's not only unique to us Africans, especially all of us coming from what I may call peripheral regions that are looked upon as underdeveloped, India, Africa, so let's say Asia, Africa, and Latin America. But when we go into the so-called developed world, we begin by our practices, we begin to shift even policy. So if you look at the trends around health delivery, the challenges around health delivery, because over years, health delivery was under threat of becoming a private good, something that is offered by the market. But the more you have challenged communities, the more you have communities rethinking how they can even reconsider, coming up with community clinics, etc., and the most unusual of places in France, etc., finding these community clinics run by Africans, run by Asians, etc. We're beginning to see that thinking coming into policy now, to begin to say, okay, there's a model that we can think in terms of delivery of health. There's a model in terms of how we can think about production of food. The community farms or small portions that are shared. If you notice, during COVID-19, there were a lot of documentaries that they were making around these community gardens. But if you looked at the participants in those community gardens, were mostly refugees or immigrants, beginning to share, but they were sharing the food with the wider community. So that kind of thing sort of disrupts prevailing thinking around the privatization of things like food, health, etc., to begin to think in a more communal or community way, which is the contribution, especially of diaspora communities going into developed regions, to challenge this pervasive atomized existence.
Absolutely. I think this brings me to why I truly appreciate Giving Tuesday's unbranded nature and how it is expressed in different countries. And sometimes, because we are also connected, we are also this huge community, the Nigerian country lead might notice something that the France country lead is doing and say, okay, I would like to introduce this to my own community here in Nigeria. And that has allowed this beautiful mix of different cultures and philanthropic approaches. And it's really shifting, how we own our solutions and challenges, to be honest. And this has been an interesting conversation with you. I really loved it. And I thought it was going to be short, it was going to be simple, but this is I feel like we have to come back to talk about this at some point, and I hope you're open to that later on.
Sure. Anytime. Sure.
Okay. We have one more segment, and that is the part where you ask the host anything. It's a fun thing because here you are the leader. I'm handing the mic over to you to ask me any question or share an insight or start a conversation where your curiosity takes you. So I'm excited to hear what's on your mind.
So I'm supposing that you have Nigerian heritage, or you're Nigerian.
I'm Nigerian, yes.
Yeah. So I would like to ask about what brings you into these conversations. What attracted you to be part of these conversations?
I would say I've always been of service all my life. And I did not take that as something that should be documented. I don't know how to explain it, but growing up, I've always wanted to be of help. I've always wanted to contribute to the society. I've always wanted to do one or two things and change my little corner. And knowing that I can do that on a global scale, working with Giving Tuesday, for example, working with over 20 country leaders, it's like living the dream. And that's what brought me here. I'm still learning, but yes, it's been
Okay.
adventurous. Yes.
Fantastic, fantastic. Yeah, I think in anything, when you bring yourself the way you've just explained, it ceases to be a job, it becomes a calling. And that's what I always hope, that as we work on the continent, it can't just be a job, it is a calling. And every opportunity is a privilege to exhibit the God-given gifts that you have.
Absolutely. I mean, this podcast is my own way of documenting nuggets, values from leaders like you and for people all over the world to learn. So yes, I truly enjoy this.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you too. And this is me also thanking everyone for listening. Thank you for joining us on this episode. We hope you found this discussion enlightening. We hope you found it inspiring. And remember that the spirit of generosity transcends borders. Until next time, I remain your host, Bidemi and Tendai.